All right, hello everybody and welcome to this month's first Wednesday video. Now, like I said before, the Wednesday video will be a little bit more relaxed, a little bit less, scripted and everything, and instead will be kind of falling into the freestyle category. I don't necessarily think that this is good or bad. On the one hand, it does let me the opportunity to kind of flex, not necessarily flex because I'm still trying to work on it, trying to work on my on-the-spot kind of narration and idea thinking, that kind of thing. So instead, today we'll be talking about series that should have just honestly wrapped it up and went home early. And honestly, if we're being completely transparent here, I think the series I brought here today won't be anything too surprising. I'm not gonna shock you, I'm not gonna impress you with this thing. Essentially every one of these that I will be presenting, if you read them or watched them, you'll probably be thinking the same thing. Probably. This should have wrapped up so much sooner. So don't come in thinking that I'm gonna blow your brains out with some kind of incredible reveal. Instead, I'm just gonna probably vocalize that deep thought in your brain that you probably had when you were when you were consuming these series. So today will be a top 5 list. Not really. That's not fair. That's not really a top 5 list. I'm just gonna present you 5. Within the 5, I topped them out, but I don't want to call this a top 5 list. Or people will start thinking, no, this one is definitely worse than this one, or you missed this one that was so much worse. I don't want to go into that, so please be gentle with me. This is kind of a practice run anyway, so we'll talk about it as I go through them. So starting off with number 5, I guess, is gonna be Tokyo Ghoul. Now, Tokyo Ghoul, when I first read it, was actually kind of interesting, and when I eventually watched the anime, was kind of had that kind of dark atmosphere, which I really enjoyed, and it's kind of rare in this fucking slice of life and all that good shit. Something like Tokyo Ghoul really pulled into a dark part of my soul and reveal something. So long story short, kind of give a synopsis, I guess, or kind of a short summary. Tokyo Ghouls was the idea that a main character, well, essentially there's these ghouls which kind of fundamentally act like vampires, follow the vampire rules, where if you bite a vampire, I guess they could become a vampire or something like that. So essentially, similarly, our main character gets taken by a ghoul, and essentially he starts turning into a ghoul. And what I really liked about the series was that it had, you just felt the main character trying his best to fight off those dark urges, those ghoulish instincts, and as a result, he gets slowly pulled into this ghoul world, and essentially we come to find out that ghouls are just everywhere in Japan. And instead, the main character is just trying his best to fight down those tendencies, the need for cannibalism and all that good stuff that seems par for the course. And he finds allies, he finds a lot of enemies, and essentially becomes an interesting game of just inner debate, inner struggle to hold it all in. And I think that was all good and well. I think the first season of the anime was pretty good, all things considered. But by the time we got to the second season, it really, and this is kind of similar for the manga. If you read the manga, it's kind of similar. I actually did quite like where it ended in the first arc, the global arc of the manga before the equivalent of season 2, I guess. I actually rather liked how it ended, even though it was kind of cliffhangery or whatever you can say, but I did kind of like that. And instead, Tokyo Ghoul's second season is just, it loses a lot of that touch. It eventually becomes a story, and sorry again, if you came into this far into the video and you didn't expect this, there will be spoilers. So apologies in advance. But it was this weird little, it just lost a lot of its flavor. I don't know. The first season and the first part of the manga had that vibe of just darkness, really. But by season 2, there's still horrific and disgusting things on your screen, but it just didn't have that same pull. I think the fights were maybe more bombastic and everything, but to me it lost a lot of that. as terrible as it sounds, the vibe, quote unquote. And as a result, I think honestly it should have been, the series probably could have wrapped up earlier. And I think one thing that's important is that I don't feel like every series needs to have a happy ending, or an ending that's morally correct, or that's ethically good, or that's legally sound. I don't think an ending for a story needs to go like that. Like, one of the reasons I like Infinity War is that, I hope, again, this is a spoilerific kind of episode, but I like that Thanos wins at the end. It makes sense for the story, it makes sense for everything that's presented so far, so it makes sense that at the end of that movie, he wins. And similarly, for the sake of what we're talking about today, I think that sometimes there's a need to kind of wrap things up too nicely, which I don't think always needs to be wrapped up too nicely, if that makes sense. Or there needs to be like a lesson taught at the end, right? Like, it's kind of like that little childhood stories, those children's stories that you read to kids. It always needs to have a moral or a lesson at the end, when in real life that's not true at all, right? So yeah, I think Tokyo Ghoul is a good first place, not first placing, I guess, of a series that kind of emblematic of the fact that not all series should just keep going. Like, some of them should wrap up. And we'll come back again with our next series, which is probably just as long running. That probably shouldn't have been that long running. And my pick is Sword Art Online. Now, Sword Art Online is a powerhouse if we think about how its impact has been, right? When it first came out, it had fantastic visuals, fantastic music, and you cannot take that away from it. It was like, honestly, it created a mini like anime boom, I would say. In the Western world, at least, where it's like people were just like, whoa, what was that? It's so pretty, it's so good looking. And if we're being honest for a second, turning off that critical brain, the story was like just this fantasy fulfillment, which makes sense in how it's able to pull in people, right? And to this day, you still see those memes of Kirito and all that good shit. And talk about some of the good for a bit. The isekai at that point wasn't overly prolific. Going into a video game world isn't like overly done either. Obviously there was Dot Hack before it and all that good stuff, but Dot Hack was kind of a niche anime anyway. So Sword Art Online really came in and solidified itself strongly, and as a result, it created a lot of critical and commercial success. However, coming back to the crux of this episode, or this video, I think this series, there's no reason it should have went on that long. If we're being honest, it peaked at like episode 3, maybe 5 if we're pushing it. After that, everything has been kind of downhill. But that's my personal opinion, and I will say, if I'm being fair, for a story, I think that it should have ended after season 1, right? Or it should have ended when they came out of that digital world. Digimon are the champions. But that's besides the point. Sorry, that's a intrusive thought. Yeah, coming back to it though, like, let's think about it critically, right? You're stuck in this video game world, and you go through the gauntlet essentially, right, to make it back out, and then, regardless, obviously there's circumstances that forces him to go into a different video game, but these are all just written out for him, right? It's all like it's pushed into that right direction, but doesn't need to be pushed in that direction. So at the end of that, you come out, you're recovering, and there's even like parts in the story that they say like, yo, you took a long time to recover, like took a while, and then for whatever reason they go into a second video game world, and like, let's assume that this is not a really like psychologically not stupid idea anyway, where it's like, because if I were to come out of this like video game world and barely come out of it, and I'm like fucking dehydrated, I'm lacking nutrition because I've been in essentially what is a coma for a year, 2 years, 3 years, all right, I wouldn't want to go back into a world of video games. I would play it maybe, but I wouldn't take that jump in, which is essentially what it becomes the second part with the elf world. I forget the name off the top of my head. And the story within that elf world, let's be honest, kind of fucking sucked. it really sucked. I mean, like, there's some like repeat things where they're discovering parts about the world, and you know, that's always fun. If any of us here have played an MMO, right, I do like that they touch some things that are like kind of MMO specific, right? Like in the early episodes where Kirito is just standing there while like these fucking pleb noobs just start like hitting him and he's taking no damage. That's a part of MMOs. It's not quite an isekai of like this fantasy setting where, you know, even the strongest knight can get shanked and killed by a goblin, right? It's because of the level difference in an MMO video game. If essentially, as long as Kirito is number one and then everybody else is, there's a huge gap between him and everybody else, Kirito is essentially immortal. Like, that's just how video game logic works. And I like some of that, obviously. That's kind of cool, I guess. But that essentially, there's been a lot of rehash, and everything that wasn't rehash kind of sucked anyway, so it was kind of pointless as a result. So to me, I mean, this should have been a flash in the pan. Sword Art Online, Sword Art Online was just a hit, right? And obviously, I do understand you gotta cash in on that, and I think in this sense, a lot of the series we're gonna be talking up throughout this video, we kind of need to acknowledge that, you know, there's a commercial reason why, you know, these series kept going, but there's a difference between creativity and commerce. So, and we're gonna talk about the creativity side and how essentially the later parts of SAO are just critically lacking, and creatively lacking too, I guess. So yeah, that's our second series on the table. Our third one is a childhood favorite of mine, and that is Bleach. Bleach. Synopsis. How do I even summarize this? I mean, okay, so this guy meets essentially what are Grim Reapers, and he finds out that these Grim Reapers are actually stopping these evil spirits, and whatever reason, blah 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 blah, one of their Grim Reaper friends is caught, so they need to go into the Grim Reaper world and save them. It's a bad summary, but I'm kind of assuming that you already know the story, so I apologize in advance. So, speaking of that though, I do think Bleach, going all the way up to the Soul Society invasion arc, was fantastic. You know, obviously there's that early part where it's like kind of, they're not 100% sure with the direction that the writer wanted to go at that point. TD Kubo was kind of like, should I go for this? Should I go for that? He introduced a lot of things. Some of them still work. Some of them got kind of like fucking smashed into a place that kind of makes sense later on in the story. But ignoring that, I think the Soul Society invasion arc was really good, and especially the anime at the time for that specific arc had so many good fights, so many good music, and Bleach had that just style and that vibe with the way the choreography of the fights and the music and the sound effects all came together. It was just fantastic. So Soul Society, and then the best part is that Soul Society ended with such a good reveal and a good, you know, push, which was the reveal that our main villain is Aizen, which to that point was kind of like this hidden figure, and it gets revealed that he's essentially plotting everything. It has one of the best reveals in anime. Honestly, it's probably like top 2, top 3, and essentially that all sets up to Aizen being the final villain, and Aizen eventually goes around and joins like the Hollow, which are, I don't know, I didn't really think this video through. I don't know if I want to go like full basic and beginner friendly, or if I want to go like deep for the fans who read or watched the series. So I'm gonna go somewhere in the middle. I apologize again if that sucks for viewing purposes. But essentially, he joins the Hollows and he sets up a Hollow Council, I guess. And then there's a big fight between the Grim Reapers and the Hollows. So at the end of it, it's just a fight, right? And I think it just came up to like this pinnacle of and then this like climax that was just perfect. I mean, our main character was a normal human who should not have had the Grim Reaper powers, but he was able to gain access to them. Eventually, his way to defeat the big bad is by giving up all his powers, like essentially Edward Elric in Fullmetal Alchemist. And I thought that was a fantastic ending, and the chapters or the episodes leading up to that end up being fantastic. I mean, like the chapter was like, it was essentially a conclusion until, of course, at the end they go like, but wait, there's more, is essentially what happened. And I think that's kind of a disservice. The arcs that come after that point, because of the 1,000-year or the 100-year war, 1,000-year war sequel that came out, people are probably more forgiving for it, because it just looks really good, it sounds really good, it looks really good, the fights are good. But if we're being honest, it's a really, really weak arc. It introduces things that we didn't really need to know about. We didn't really need to care. There were things that were wrapped up already, such as the Quincy's that just got reopened for whatever reason. There were parts that were kind of talked about that were just unnecessary. Some of the introductions are just kind of pointless, and a lot of it is just, it just got, I don't know. To me, it's like a perfect burger. Have you ever had one of those meals that like look really, really good on like a video or something, and then at the end, for whatever reason, they add like gold foil on top, and you're like, I mean, it's pretty, I guess, which is which is the 1,000-year war, I guess, is the analogy. The gold foil is pretty, but it doesn't it doesn't add, and I'm just gonna eat around it because who the fuck eats gold foil, right? So yeah, that's Bleach to me. Obviously, I think that at the end of the Aizen fight, which was kind of funny in its own sense, being the butterfly form, whatever, you know, butterfly effect and all that good shit. I thought it was a good way to naturally end the series there, and as a result, I think we should have ended there. And honestly, just give us a little fucking preview. Like, if you read the manga, and you read the conclusion and the epilogue, right? If you just cut and paste that onto, you know, what eventually became after that part, it would have been the exact same ending. Like the ending didn't naturally, the ending didn't fundamentally change in a way because of the additional arcs, the additional sections. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm too critical for that, but that's how I feel. Moving on, these two last series, man, they're so sad in different ways. Number 2 is gonna be Promise Neverland. Oh god, you know, I followed Promise Neverland since it first released its first chapter, and that first chapter was fantastic. The reveal at the end of the first chapter, with it being that the orphanage that for gifted students, kind of like the fucking X-Men, is actually like this feeding house for eventual food for demons. I thought that was such a great reveal. I really love the premise of, essentially, you know, these demons love the flavor of human brains, and the more complex thinking humans are, the better tasting the brains. So essentially they give them like fucking Sudoku puzzles and like Rubik's cubes, and like try and force their brains to force the kids to become more and more intelligent and flourish in different ways, like intellectually. But then because of that, all these kids are essentially putting up a good fight in the fight to not be eaten, to you know, not have their plot uncovered, that they're actually looking to escape from the daycare or from the orphanage, right? And it was a lot of cat and mouse, that kind of thing, and a lot of betrayals and alliances and all that good stuff. And I thought it was a great series. That orphanage arc is fantastic. Like, every last part of it, I would say, is just really, really good. The you know, it also shows that things don't always go to plan, which I really like. That, you know, there were some things that were done that were not within the scope of what they thought they would do, and what they didn't know they would do, and at the end it was just like very, very neat, honestly. And it's just one of those things that, like, when the end of that saga happened, you're like, shit, they did it, these motherfuckers did it, right? And they made it out, and it was like, at that point, honestly, all they had to do was go like, and you know, the kids made it out. What would they do? What is out there in the world? And then just like 3 dots it, and then that's it, right? Instead, they go into this second portion of, I don't even know if it's cat and mouse anymore. It's like, I mean, essentially they find out the world out there is a fucking wasteland. Everything sucks out there. There's not much to look at. There's not much to do. Demons are chasing them, obviously, because they're like prized possessions, right? Because if you think about it, if they're able to outsmart demons even for a little bit, then their brains must be delicious. So it must be the best meals they've ever had. They could ever had. So essentially becomes that way. I don't know, the story kind of devolves and it goes into places that are just kind of confusing. There's like some stuff, some critical moments in the beloved orphanage arc that just gets bastardized and pissed on, essentially later down in the second part. And I don't know, I think the fact that you set up such a fantastic setting, you create one of the best hide and seek, cat and mouse, intellectual battle kind of sagas, and then just throw it out the window. And honestly, you had such a good way to end it. And of course, again, this comes back to the idea that I personally don't think that all stories need to have a good ending, right? I think what they're trying to do is that, the author thought, well, okay, they made it up, but we have to beat the demons. We have to beat the demons. And essentially the rest of the story is like, they take the heart away to beat the demons. They got to run away from demons, and eventually they're going to assemble an army. I think that was the global goal. That obviously, if you read the story, it's not exactly how it went, but I think that at a certain point that he wrote himself into, like, he's trying to present like this unwinnable battle. And in my sense, in my idea, it makes sense that it's an unwinnable battle and that we should keep it that way. But instead, they decide to go down the route of let's keep going, let's see what happens. And I think that does a disservice to what was a really compact, really well written, really well presented kind of first part. And that's really it. Coming back to it, let's end off, and it's gonna be on a similar note with our last series. It's actually very, very similar. So it's gonna be Death Note. Now, I don't think again, like I said at the beginning of the video, right? None of these will actually probably surprise you. Again, if you read Death Note, if you watch Death Note, it'll just be like, I mean, like, I'm not even being creative or original here. Everybody agrees. So, I mean, Death Note, essentially a kid, I guess, a really highly intellectual kid, I guess, like, that A student in your class that just everything goes well for him. Essentially, it's that kid just gains access to this notebook where if you write a person's real name and you see him, or you think of him, or I forget what the exact rules were, but essentially you write their name and they die, or you could like plan their death up to a certain point. And essentially, because he's idealistic, and we've all kind of been that way, I guess, at a certain age, where you think that you can solve crime and evil in the world, and because everything just goes right from him in his life, he thinks that too, right? And he's a really smart guy, so he does these complex plans to essentially try and solve crime, try and solve the concept of evil, even as weird as that sounds. So he wants to be lawfully neutral, I guess, where he just follows the letter of the law, or he wants to, I don't know really. I shouldn't have brought the D&D alignment thing. That's kind of pointless. But essentially, yeah, like he just looks at the world and he thinks that I can fix it. And essentially, the idea is that even though what his actions do might be ethically correct, it might be morally correct, but it's not legally correct, right? Because as humans and as a society, good lord, I'm about to say as a society, we all fundamentally agreed on a legal system. Of course, there's going to be protests for bad laws, but essentially the idea is that laws can be altered and pushed back on, but essentially we all fundamentally agree that there should be law and order. And because our main character Kira does not follow that and essentially becomes judge, jury, executioner, all three in one, he's above the law, and as a result he needs to be brought in, he needs to be taken down. So obviously, because all this is kind of supernatural and all that good shit, Kira essentially finds a intellectual equivalent, and essentially this game becomes this story becomes a game of whodunit. It becomes a game of cat and mouse again, this good or evil, that kind of thing. And there's a lot of dichotomies that are very interesting too between our main characters, right? Because Kira is presented to be this incredibly good looking, everything's working for him, he's smart, he's well off. I wouldn't say he's rich, I guess. He's good looking, he's tall, he's strong, he's physically able, and he becomes like this he becomes like the perfect man essentially, right? But his ideas are inherently evil in a sense. His idea is that I need to do evil for the sake of evil, for the sake of good, actually. I guess it's the other way around. And essentially, on the other hand, our opposing force, Mr. L, is, he's like a hunchback essentially. He's like he looks like me after a long gaming session, and he even sits like me after a long gaming session where it's like nothing's just going right. And on the other hand, he stands for the law, the side of the law. He stands for the side of good. And it's just this weird thing, because one of them is like this shining icon essentially, who's actually inherently evil, and then we have this guy who looks super gloomy. You could smell bad vibes from him, but he represents the good part. And I really like these little subtle characteristics about them that makes it interesting. And essentially, these two have mental warfare. A lot of things happen, in fact, and at the end of the day, Kira triumphed. And again, I apologize. I mean, I don't even apologize anymore. Like, honestly, we've been through so many parts with spoilers. At this point, it's your fault if you actually cared. But Kira comes out ahead and takes down L. And honestly, that should have been it. I think that was a perfect way to end it. Have one more chapter, one more episode that's like, and yep, Kira essentially, slowly wiped out all evil in the world. And after a century of peace, it turned out that all this was not sustainable. The fear of punishment, divine punishment, does not outweigh the inherent existence of evil, or something like that, right? Instead, of course, because it needs to have this ending that's morally correct or ethically correct or whatever, it gets introduced to like this essentially mini L. And I don't know, man, like at the end of it, Kira gets outsmarted. And I'm not a huge Kira fan in the sense that I wanted to see him win, right? I'm actually, having time to reflect, because when I first read this, I was an edgy teenager. But now as an adult, I'm like, yeah, it makes sense that it shouldn't work out that way. But for storytelling purposes, again, I was perfectly fine if you just ended the series off with that. What we would have had is a very succinct, very creative, very like actually kind of memeable. If everybody has ever read or watched the potato chip scene, I mean, that was in part 1. I don't know anybody who talks about part 2 in any glowing way. There's no scene that were particularly memorable. The characters weren't interesting, and it just fundamentally sucked. Like, yeah, the end of the Shinigami and like the deal with the devil, right? Which what Kira essentially flaunts the entire time. It's like, I can overcome the deal with the devil, essentially. The deal with the devil, I mean, like, that's kind of interesting, I guess, that he ends up that way. But I think that the epilogue could have been something similar, right? Of like the hypothetical epilogue where it's like he's just on his deathbed, and then Ryuk is just looking over him and was like, you thought you could be God, but it was but fleeting or some shit. And then he kind of expires right then and there. So yeah, to me, without going too deep into it, I think we talked about it a lot, so I'm not going to go too much more into it. But yeah, essentially, these are the series that I thought should have ended early. Of course, these are not the only series, and I might come visit back this topic more after having put more thought to it. I thought these were just the most obvious that I could think of. But yeah. Again, this is also like a YouTube friendly format, so I don't want to go over the 5, and we're kind of running long as is. So in any case, I hope you guys enjoyed. We'll be back next Sunday with one of more creative, one of more scripted episodes. But like I said, our Wednesday episodes are going to be kind of something like this, a little bit more freestyle and all that good stuff. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you have a nice rest of the day. Have a nice one, dummies.